London, 1845. The Thornhill Art Gallery glowed with the light of hundreds of candles, their flames dancing gently as London's elite milled among monumental canvases. The air vibrated with discreet conversations, the rustle of expensive silks, and the clink of champagne glasses. It was the opening of the spring exhibition, an event that attracted not only art connoisseurs but also those who made social life their true masterpiece. Between marble columns and crimson velvet drapes, lords and ladies examined pastoral landscapes and aristocratic portraits, offering measured opinions on perspective and the use of color. Maxwell Ashford, the Earl of Ravenswood, stood motionless before an elaborate still life, though his eyes saw far beyond the fruits and flowers captured in oil. At 33, he possessed a presence that stopped conversations when he entered a drawing room. Tall, athletically built, with dark brown hair always impeccably combed and deep green eyes that seemed to see through the social masks everyone wore. His charcoal gray wool overcoat was perfectly tailored, the work of Savile Row's most sought-after tailor. The society papers described him as the season's most eligible catch. Young debutantes called him unattainable, an enigma wrapped in silk and good manners. A truly masterful work, wouldn't you agree, my lord? Maxwell turned to find Lord Pemberton at his side, a gentleman whose presence he tolerated mainly out of business obligations. Undoubtedly, the technique demonstrates exceptional mastery. By the way, haven't you met my daughter yet? Pemberton waved to a young woman waiting a few paces away, her expectant eyes fixed on Maxwell. Miss Lydia Pemberton, recently presented at court for her first season. Maxwell suppressed a barely perceptible sigh. This was the 18th such performance in the past few weeks alone. Miss Pemberton, he bowed with the courtesy he'd practiced since childhood. How have you found London life? The girl blushed violently, her words stumbling over each other with evident nervousness. Maxwell maintained his gentle expression, asking the appropriate questions about her arrival and impressions of the city, while her mind wandered to distant territories. After a few minutes of polite conversation, he excused himself with impeccable manners that, even so, made it clear that the exchange had come to an end. My lord, Lady Thornbury intercepted him near a series of delicate watercolors. Her daughter, a beautiful young woman in her third season, blushed deeply when Maxwell curtsied. Miss Thornbury was just commenting on the extraordinary luminosity in these works. Wasn't she, my dear? The young woman's assessment of the watercolors was clearly rehearsed, but Maxwell nodded with diplomatic appreciation. A most astute observation, Miss Thornbury. You possess admirable artistic sensitivity. The conversation proceeded in its predictable pattern, pleasantries exchanged, marital innuendos subtly woven, and Maxwell's practiced defenses forming an insurmountable barrier. 6 seasons in London had passed, with Maxwell maintaining this careful dance, never allowing any lady close enough to penetrate the walls that guarded his heart. His private secretary, Mr. Davison, had compiled a meticulous list of suitable candidates for Countess at the insistence of his mother, Lady Margaret Ashford. The list remained locked in the bottom drawer of his desk, untouched and forgotten. Lady Margaret's patience was quickly wearing thin. The Ashford line cannot perish without descendants, she reminded him with increasing frequency. His duty to the title cannot be postponed indefinitely, Maxwell. Duty. The word had become a weight he carried like invisible chains. His thoughts were interrupted by a subtle shift in the gallery's atmosphere. Conversations faltered imperceptibly, heads turned with barely concealed curiosity, a rippling murmur rippled through the space until the crowd parted like theater curtains. She emerged like a vision in pearl-gray silk. Lady Isabella Hartley, the widow who had disappeared from society 5 years ago. The moment froze in Maxwell's consciousness, every detail etched with crystal clarity. His gloved hand rested gracefully on his companion's arm, her honey-blonde hair arranged in an elegant coiffure beneath a modest hat adorned with a single onyx brooch. She was slimmer than he remembered, her face more defined, but somehow even more beautiful, a beauty refined by suffering and time. Maxwell's carefully cultivated composure wavered. The wineglass in his hand trembled slightly as memories flooded him with overwhelming force. Isabella at 17, laughing in a Sussex garden during a golden summer. Isabella at 18, silent tears streaming down her face as she told him of her impending engagement to Lord Edmund Hartley. Isabella at 19, a distant figure in an ancient chapel, pronouncing sacred vows to another man while Maxwell's heart silently shattered. "Excuse me," he murmured to Lady Thornbury, who followed his gaze and gasped audibly. "It's her. Well, I never imagined. Lady Hartley has returned. How unusual, after all this time and considering the rumors that had been circulating." His voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. "They say her husband's death was shrouded in mystery, a robust man who departed suddenly in the night, and she inherited absolutely everything." Maxwell's jaw tightened involuntarily. "Excuse me, Lady Thornbury." He moved through the crowd with controlled determination, ignoring the greetings of acquaintances. Isabella stood before an equestrian portrait, her profile illuminated by the soft light of nearby candles. His companion, a middle-aged woman Maxwell recognized as his aunt, Lady Constance Beaumont, was the first to notice him. "My lord," Lady Constance curtsied, assessing him with shrewd eyes that seemed to see too much. "What a pleasant meeting." Isabella turned slowly, and for a fleeting instant, her carefully composed expression faltered. Something flashed in her eyes, recognition mingled with pain, perhaps both simultaneously, before the mask of polite society returned. "My lord," she said, her voice softer and more controlled than he remembered. "How unexpected, indeed." "Lady Hartley," Maxwell replied, the formal title sounding bitter on his tongue. "Unexpected, indeed. 5 years constitutes a rather long absence." Isabella's lips curved in what society would accept as a smile, though it didn't reach her clear eyes. "The countryside offers serenities that London cannot provide, though I observe that the capital has prospered magnificently without my presence." Her aunt observed the exchange, clearly sensing the undercurrent. "I believe Lady Pemberton is trying to get my attention. If you'll allow me a moment." Left alone in the crowd, Isabella and Maxwell stared at each other. 5 years of separation and an eternity of regret between them. "You look magnificent, Isabella," Maxwell said, his voice low and restrained. "As do you, my lord." "Maxwell," he corrected softly. "We've spoken without titles in the past." "That was before," she replied, her gaze falling on the exhibition catalogue she clutched too tightly. "Circumstances have changed. People change." "Not all people," Maxwell disagreed, taking an almost imperceptible step toward her. "Not in all respects." "Why have you returned now, Isabella?" "My period of mourning is over. Aunt Constance believes it is an appropriate time for me to reintegrate into society." His words were carefully measured, clearly rehearsed. 3 years of official mourning for Lord Hartley ended 2 years ago, Maxwell observed. "Yet you remained hidden at Willowmere Manor." Isabella's eyes met his with a flash of defiance. "You kept informed of my whereabouts." "I would have written," Maxwell said, the intensity in his voice betraying his carefully guarded emotions, "if I had believed I would be welcome." Around them, the exhibition continued its normal flow, but Maxwell was acutely aware of the furtive glances being cast in his direction. Society matrons leaned toward one another, whispering behind ornate fans. Isabella noticed it too, her shoulders straightening imperceptibly. "I need to find my aunt. Will you be attending the Ashworth ball tomorrow night?" Maxwell asked quickly, almost urgently. Isabella hesitated, her expression revealing uncertainty. "I hadn't planned to attend." "Then reconsider, please." Maxwell's voice carried an intensity that surprised even him. London remained incomplete during his absence. Before she could formulate a response, Lady Winchester approached, her curiosity barely concealed beneath her cordial greeting. Isabella took advantage of the interruption to gracefully withdraw, joining her aunt on the other side of the gallery. Maxwell watched her go, aware that multiple pairs of eyes noticed his fixed attention on the returning widow. He could already anticipate the next morning's gossip. The Earl of Ravenswood, London's most eligible bachelor, showing obvious interest in a widow surrounded by scandalous whispers. By the end of the evening, Maxwell had made little effort to dispel such speculation. As Isabella prepared to leave, he positioned himself strategically near the entrance, their paths crossing once more in a way that seemed casual but was carefully calculated. "Lady Hartley," he bowed deeply. "Until we meet again." Isabella regarded him with cautious, guarded eyes. "Perhaps, my lord." As she descended the steps toward the waiting carriage, Maxwell moved close enough to speak so only she could hear. "I have waited for you, Isabella." Isabella froze momentarily, then turned with a smile that mingled sadness with something darker. "The Lord waited, but in rather good company, as I understand from the accounts." The carriage door closed with a final sound, and Maxwell remained alone on the steps, watching the woman who had haunted his dreams for 5 years disappear once again into the characteristic London fog. That evening, in his study at Ashford House, Maxwell poured a generous measure of brandy and fixed his gaze on the flames in the fireplace. His butler, Stevens, had served him faithfully for 15 years and knew how to recognize when his lord required absolute solitude. "Is there anything else you require, my lord?" "No, Stevens, I thank you." When the door closed quietly, Maxwell loosened his tie and leaned back in his leather chair. Isabella Hartley, no, Isabella Fairchild as he had known her before their marriage, had returned to London. The revelation simultaneously elated and deeply disturbed him. 5 years since he had last seen her, at her husband's funeral. He had attended out of respect for convention, standing at the back of the church, watching Isabella, pale and composed in her widow's black robes, receive condolences with a dignity that broke his heart. He had approached briefly, offered formal words of condolence, and departed without any private exchange. What could he have said, after all? That he mourned the death of the man who had taken her from him, who had never stopped loving her even as she stood beside her husband's grave. Maxwell drained his glass in one gulp. Tomorrow, the Ashworth ball. If Isabella attended, a significant if, he recognized, it would signal her intention to fully reintegrate into London society. And if she didn't, would he seek her out anyway? Social conventions be damned. The answer, he knew with absolute certainty, had already been decided 5 years ago. Isabella Hartley sat at her dressing table while her lady-in-waiting, Morris, removed the delicate pins from her hair. The modest house on Bedford Square belonged to her aunt, Lady Beaumont, who had offered it as a refuge when Isabella decided to return to London after her long, self-imposed exile. "You received considerable attention at the exhibition tonight, my lady," Morris noted, carefully brushing Isabella's honey-blonde hair, particularly from the Earl of Ravenswood. Isabella met the maid's eyes in the ornate mirror. Morris had been with her through the dark days of her marriage and the even darker days that followed. "Do you know who he was to me before, Morris?" "Yes, my lady." Morris's hands were gentle as they untangled a stubborn knot. "The gentleman you favored before Lord Hartley's proposal." "Favored?" Isabella's laugh held no humor. "Such an inadequate word for what existed between us, Morris." "And now, my lady, does he still exist?" Isabella closed her eyes slowly. "It doesn't matter what remains. A widow with my tarnished reputation has no place in the world of the Earl of Ravenswood." "If I may be so bold, my lady," Morris said cautiously, his lordship seemed to profoundly disagree with that assessment tonight. "His lordship," Isabella replied in a controlled voice, "has not heard the venomous whispers that haunt me incessantly. He does not know what they say about Edmund's death." Morris's hand stilled for a moment. "But you know the truth, my lady, as I do." "The truth rarely prevails in the face of persistent and virulent gossip." Isabella opened her eyes, her reflection revealing a weariness that transcended physical exhaustion. "Besides, Maxwell has duties to consider, finding a suitable countess to provide him with an heir. I would only complicate everything terribly. Will you be attending the Ashworth ball tomorrow?" Isabella hesitated noticeably. "I hadn't intended to attend, but now I find myself reconsidering against my better judgment. She picked up a carved silver brush, a gift from her father years ago. How foolish, Morris, to allow a brief conversation to influence my carefully laid plans. Not foolish, my lady, Morris said softly. Simply human. After Morris had left, Isabella went to the window overlooking the silent square. London stretched out in the distance, a city that had once been her home, then a prison of crushing expectations, and finally a distant memory during her years in the country. She hadn't lied to Maxwell. Her aunt had, in fact, firmly encouraged her to return to society. You can't hide in the country forever, Constance had written. You are only 24, Isabella. Life still awaits you. What Constance didn't understand was that Isabella had built a meaningful life at Willowmere Manor, a quiet existence filled with books, natural history studies, and long walks through the rolling countryside. She had her own small circle of like-minded friends, Lady Worthington, a scholar of mineralogy, the Reverend Dr. Clark, whose research on local geology had been published in academic journals, and Mrs. Pemberton, whose extensive library was always open to Isabella without restriction. But something was undeniably missing. Perhaps it was the young woman she once was, the debutante who dreamed of love matches and glittering seasons in London. Or perhaps it was simply that hiding, however comfortable it had become, was still fundamentally hiding. I waited for you. Maxwell's words echoed persistently in her mind. Had he really waited? The society papers that occasionally reached Willowmere frequently mentioned the Earl of Ravenswood in connection with various eligible young ladies. There had been rumors of an engagement 3 years ago, though nothing had materialized. Isabella touched the cool glass of the window. Perhaps she would attend the ball tomorrow, if only to discover what Maxwell had truly meant and whether his words would prove mere polite courtesy or something deeper. Well, she had survived devastating disappointments before. The Ashworth ball was in its full splendor. Crystal chandeliers glittered, the orchestra played captivating melodies, and the ballroom bustled with London's elite in their most elaborate attire. Footmen circulated with French champagne and delicate delicacies, while attendants kept a watchful eye on the debutantes from the comfort of velvet-upholstered chairs along the mirrored walls. Maxwell moved through the crowd with natural ease, accepting compliments and deflecting marriage proposals with a subtle elegance that bordered on artistry. His attire, an impeccably tailored black coat over a silver-gray waistcoat and perfectly tied white tie, identified him as a man of wealth and refined taste. My lord, Lord Ashworth approached with champagne in hand. A truly magnificent presence, wouldn't you agree? Maxwell replied, his gaze continually scanning the main entrance. Your annual ball consistently outdoes itself. Lady Pemberton was asking about you, Ashworth mentioned casually. Her daughter is quite talented, I'm told. She speaks 5 languages fluently. I'm sure she'll make an excellent companion for someone, Maxwell said, his tone making it absolutely clear he had no intention of being that someone. Ashworth cleared his throat uncomfortably. Perhaps, though one wonders when the Earl of Ravenswood will finally choose a countess. His mother, Lady Margaret, was commenting just yesterday that Ashford House remains without a lady. Maxwell's smile didn't waver, though his patience was quickly wearing thin. My mother's concerns are duly noted, Ashworth, as they have been consistently for the past 6 years. The conversation was abruptly interrupted by a wave of whispers that spread through the room like wildfire. Maxwell turned and felt his heart skip a dangerous beat. Isabella stood majestically in the doorway, a stunning vision in sapphire blue silk that accentuated the luminosity of her pale skin and the golden hue of her hair. Unlike widows who preferred perpetual black or muted lilac, she had chosen a color that declared her mourning officially over. She wore diamonds at her neck, Fairchild family jewels, not Hartley heirlooms, Maxwell noted with satisfaction. Well, Ashworth murmured, Lady Hartley is certainly making a statement with her return, quite brave considering the peculiar circumstances. Maxwell's jaw tightened visibly. What circumstances, exactly? Ashworth shifted uncomfortably. Just the unusual nature of your widowhood, my lord. Lord Hartley's death was quite sudden and unexpected. The rumors are exactly that, Maxwell interrupted, his tone brooking no argument. Unfounded rumors. Excuse me. Maxwell crossed the room toward Isabella and her aunt with deliberate slowness, fully aware that every eye in the room was following him. Let them watch, he thought with renewed determination. Let them whisper as they please. Lady Hartley, he bowed deeply. You honor the Ashworths with your presence this evening. Isabella's eyes met his, a flash of vulnerability quickly masked. My lord. I have reconsidered, as you suggested. May I request the honor of the next dance? Lady Beaumont raised an expressive eyebrow but remained strategically silent. Isabella's hesitation was almost imperceptible. I'm not sure that would be prudent, my lord. Since when does prudence dictate your choices, Isabella? He asked, his voice low enough for only her to hear, deliberately using her name without title. Her eyes widened slightly at the intimacy of his speech. Since I learned the devastating cost of your absence, she replied with equal softness. Nevertheless, as the orchestra began a Viennese waltz, Isabella placed her gloved hand decisively in Maxwell's. He led her onto the polished dance floor, intensely aware of the hushed conversations their partnership inspired throughout the room. You caused quite a stir, Maxwell observed as they began to dance, his hand resting firmly on her waist, his touch transmitting warmth through the layers of fabric. I've grown accustomed to being the object of constant speculation, Isabella replied, maintaining impeccable posture, her back straight, and her steps precise. Though I admit that dancing with London's most sought-after Earl has heightened the interest considerably. Let them speak freely, Maxwell said with conviction. They will speak regardless of our actions. The waltz brought them closer than strict decorum would allow. Isabella's perfume, lilies of the valley and something uniquely hers, clouded Maxwell's senses dangerously. She had always moved with natural grace, but now there was a controlled dignity in her bearing that revealed strength forged through suffering. You dance as beautifully as you ever did, Maxwell said. It's kind of you to say so, though I've had little practice in recent years. The Sussex fields don't provide suitable dance partners. Maxwell smiled at the glimpse of her dry, intelligent humor, an essential part of Isabella he'd feared he'd lost forever. Why did you ask me to reconsider attending tonight? Isabella asked bluntly. Because for 5 endless years, I've attended these events obsessively imagining you might suddenly appear, Maxwell admitted with brutal honesty. Now that you've returned, I can't bear the thought of waiting another day to see you again. Isabella lost her rhythm imperceptibly, recovering so quickly that only Maxwell noticed. You speak dangerously, my lord. Maxwell, he corrected again insistently. And yes, perhaps I speak dangerously, but 5 years of enforced silence between us seems punishment enough for any transgressions we've committed. The music swelled around them as they twirled elegantly. Isabella's expression remained carefully neutral, though her eyes betrayed deep inner turmoil. The rumors of Lord Hartley's death, Maxwell began carefully. They are not appropriate topics for a ballroom, Isabella concluded with absolute firmness. Or for any setting in which we might meet. Isabella, please, he urged softly. Not here, not now, she whispered, her composure threatening to shatter. The dance ended gracefully, and Isabella stepped back, curtsying appropriately. Maxwell responded, reluctant to release her companion. As he escorted her off the dance floor, Lady Pemberton strategically intercepted them, her daughter following nervously. Lady Hartley, she greeted with false cordiality. What a surprise to see you in society again. We had completely given up hope of your return. Lady Pemberton, Isabella acknowledged calmly. Some journeys require considerable time. Indeed, Lady Pemberton offered a tight smile. And what truly interesting timing, her reappearance coinciding precisely with when certain legal deadlines expire. Maxwell felt Isabella visibly stiffen beside him. Lady Pemberton, he interjected, his tone as icy as winter. Your daughter seems to be urgently requesting your attention. When Lady Pemberton reluctantly withdrew, Isabella's face was visibly pale. "I shouldn't have come tonight," she murmured softly. "Isabella," Maxwell gripped her gloved hand firmly, completely disregarding decorum. "Whatever shadows relentlessly pursue you, they cannot touch you while I am present." "That is precisely what I fear, my lord," she said, gently withdrawing her hand. "That they may reach you through me." Before he could respond properly, Isabella's aunt approached, accompanied by Lord Hampton, an elderly gentleman known for his academic interests rather than empty social ambitions. "Lady Hartley," Lord Hampton bowed respectfully. "I was telling Lady Beaumont about my recent archaeological expedition to Egypt. I understand you developed an interest in classical antiquities during your country residence." Isabella's expression genuinely softened for the first time that tense evening. "Indeed, Lord Hampton. My proximity to several Roman ruins in Sussex has afforded me ample opportunity to study ancient architecture and artifacts. Absolutely fascinating, Lady Hartley. I have long believed that our understanding of ancient civilizations remains woefully inadequate. Have you read the most recent translation of Champollion's hieroglyphics?" Maxwell watched Isabella converse animatedly with Lord Hampton, her knowledge and intellectual passion evident in every word. This was an Isabella he hadn't fully known, a woman who had built a life of genuine substance during her years away from the frivolities of London society. "She's extraordinary, isn't she?" Lady Beaumont commented quietly beside Maxwell. Edmund tried to extinguish that inner flame in her, her natural curiosity, her keen intelligence. He nearly succeeded in destroying her completely. Maxwell visibly tensed. Had he been cruel to her in specific ways? Lady Beaumont's gaze was penetrating and assessing. "Not in a way that left visible marks on the world, my lord, but cruelty has countless sophisticated disguises." The revelation left Maxwell deeply disturbed. As the evening inexorably progressed, he observed Isabella from a respectable distance. She maintained impeccable social composure, but he noticed how she naturally gravitated toward guests with substantial intellectual interests rather than mere social prestige. Lord Hampton introduced her to Professor Whitmore of Cambridge, whose conversation animated her far more than any idle gossip of high society could. Later, as Isabella prepared to leave, Maxwell positioned himself strategically at her side once more. "May I visit you tomorrow?" he asked with barely concealed hope. "Perhaps we could visit the British Museum. Her interest in classical antiquities would be magnificently served there." Isabella hesitated visibly, considering. "My lord, I don't know." "A completely public place," he quickly assured her. "With her aunt as a suitable chaperone, perfectly respectable in every way." After a moment of silent reflection, Isabella nodded almost imperceptibly. 2 o'clock in the afternoon, then. When his carriage finally departed, Maxwell was approached by his best friend, Lord Sebastian Worthington. "Ravenswood," Sebastian patted him firmly on the shoulder. "Playing with dangerous fire, aren't you? The mysterious widow Hartley has a dark cloud hanging over her permanently." "Speak clearly, Sebastian," Maxwell said with growing impatience. Sebastian lowered his voice conspiratorially. "They say Lord Hartley's death was deeply suspicious. A robust man of 42, dying suddenly in his sleep, and his widow, only 21 at the time, inheriting absolutely everything, despite a marriage of less than 2 years. There were persistent rumors of a formal investigation, though nothing officially materialized." "Nothing materialized because there was absolutely nothing to discover," Maxwell stated with unwavering firmness. Sebastian watched him intently with piercing eyes. "You know more than you're letting on, my friend." "I know Isabella intimately," Maxwell replied with conviction. "That's enough for me." Sebastian sighed in resignation. "Just be extremely careful, old friend. High society has extraordinarily long memories and razor-sharp teeth. What is it about Lady Hartley that makes you throw all caution to the wind? You've never shown comparable interest in any of the perfectly suitable young ladies who have paraded before you season after season." Maxwell's gaze followed the path Isabella's carriage had taken through the London night. Because none of them were her, Sebastian. Simply put. Isabella arrived at her aunt's house completely exhausted, not from physical exertion but from the constant mental vigilance required to navigate the treacherous waters of society. As Morris helped her prepare for bed, she recounted the evening's significant events. Lady Pemberton was particularly venomous tonight, Isabella said, trembling slightly. She practically accused me of murder in front of half the ballroom. That woman never forgave her for capturing Lord Hartley's attention when she had obvious hopes for her niece, Morris replied with intimate knowledge of the situation. And now she sees her capturing the Earl's attention as well, which only intensifies her resentment. Isabella observed her reflection thoughtfully. I'm not consciously capturing anyone's attention, Morris. With all due respect, my lady, but his lordship would vehemently disagree with that assessment. Morris's hands were skillful as they braided Isabella's hair. He danced exclusively with you tonight, the servants inform me. Society gossip travels with extraordinary speed, Isabella murmured resignedly. Especially when it involves an eligible earl and a controversial widow. Morris tied her braid with a satin ribbon. Will you receive him tomorrow as agreed? At the British Museum, yes, with the appropriate companion from Aunt Constance. Morris's expression remained carefully neutral, though his eyes showed silent approval. Very proper and respectable, my lady. When Morris finally retired, Isabella felt too restless to sleep immediately. She went to her small, delicate desk and removed a Moroccan leather-bound diary from a locked drawer. Opening it to a blank page, she began writing in elegant handwriting. June 15, 1845. I saw him again tonight. After 5 endless years, Maxwell stood before me, simultaneously unchanged and utterly transformed. He remains as extraordinarily handsome as my memory obsessively insisted. Yet there is a seriousness to him now, a maturity that suits him magnificently. When he said he'd waited for me all these years, I nearly broke down publicly. How cruelly tempting those words had been, had I allowed myself to believe them completely. Yet his eyes conveyed such profound sincerity. The same emerald green eyes that once promised me everything before duty brutally tore us apart. Lady Pemberton made her veiled accusations tonight, exactly as I'd anticipated. The familiar, venomous whispers followed me around the ballroom relentlessly. Suspicious widow, fortune hunter, perhaps something even worse in the most creative minds. Yet Maxwell remained steadfastly by my side, seemingly unconcerned about the potential damage to his impeccable reputation. Does he truly not understand what associating with me might cost him socially? Or does he simply not care at all? I've agreed to meet him tomorrow at the British Museum. Conventional wisdom suggests I maintain a respectful distance, protecting both him and myself from further scandal. But wisdom has provided me scant comfort during these 5 lonely years. I find myself once again at a decisive crossroads, torn between familiar security and the tantalizing possibility of genuine happiness. The last time I faced such a choice, I chose my father's financial security over my heart's desires, and I paid a devastating price for that decision. What price would I pay now if I chose differently? Should I dare to choose differently this time? Isabella closed the diary carefully, returning it to its locked drawer. She went to the window, gazing out at the silent, gas-lit streets of sleeping London. Somewhere in that vast, nocturnal city, Maxwell might be looking toward Bedford Square, thinking of her just as she thought of him. The thought brought her both comforting solace and disturbing apprehension. That same evening, in his elegant Mayfair residence, Maxwell sat before the crackling fireplace, a glass of fine brandy untouched by his side. His personal servant had been dismissed some time ago, leaving him completely alone with his turbulent thoughts and lingering memories. He remembered Isabella as she had been before, laughing freely, vibrant and full of life, her eyes clear of any sadness. He vividly remembered their last truly private conversation in the fragrant garden of her father's house, when she had told him of her impending and inevitable marriage to Lord Edmund Hartley. My father's catastrophic debts, she had explained, silent tears streaming down her angelic face. He will lose absolutely everything if I don't accept Edmund's proposal. Edmund had agreed to settle all the debts completely. I could settle everything just as well, Maxwell had argued with growing desperation. Marry me, Isabella. We promised each other. Your family would never accept a bride whose father had thrown away his fortune and good name so recklessly, Isabella had replied, her voice breaking. You know that perfectly well, Maxwell. Your responsibilities to your earldom, your future obligations, all depend on a profitable marriage. I love you more than any responsibility. But duty prevailed cruelly for both of them in the end. And now, 5 years after that devastating day, she had returned transformed, more reserved and cautious, but somehow still fundamentally the same extraordinary woman who had captured his heart completely. Maxwell went to his imposing desk, unlocked a secret drawer, and withdrew a small, dark blue velvet box. Inside lay a ring he had commissioned 5 years ago from a renowned jeweler, a sapphire surrounded by brilliant white diamonds, designed specifically to enhance Isabella's eyes. He had brought it with him to Sussex on the fateful day he planned to formally propose, only to hear Isabella tearfully inform him of her newly announced engagement to Hartley. He had guarded the ring carefully all these endless years, completely unable to part with it even when he had briefly considered marrying Lady Caroline Pemberton 3 years ago. Now, gazing upon its perfectly polished, gleaming surface, Maxwell made a final, irrevocable decision. Whatever shadows lingered over Isabella, he would dispel them with absolute determination. Whatever the full truth behind Edmund Hartley's death, he would face it without hesitation. 5 years earlier, duty had painfully separated them. He would not allow anything at all, unfounded rumors, fabricated scandals, or even Isabella's own deep-seated fears, to keep them apart again. The British Museum in Bloomsbury offered a civilized refuge from the perpetually watchful eyes of London society. Though still technically public, the vast, hushed galleries allowed for conversation without constant social scrutiny. June had brought vibrant life to the gardens surrounding the museum, flowers blooming in colorful profusion and trees displaying lush, dark green foliage under a characteristic partly cloudy sky. Isabella walked gracefully beside Maxwell, followed by her aunt at a discreet but appropriate distance. Her mint-green muslin dress and ribbon-trimmed straw hat gave her an air of spring freshness that contrasted sharply with the thoughtful gravity of her expressive eyes. As for your interest in classical antiquities, Maxwell observed as Isabella paused to examine an ancient Greek vase with painted figures, is it a relatively recent development? After Edmund's death, she said carefully, choosing her words precisely. I found that conventional feminine pastimes were insufficient to adequately occupy my restless mind. Books became my most faithful companions, especially those about ancient history and lost civilizations. Lady Worthington, our close neighbor in Sussex, introduced me to several renowned historians and archaeologists. Maxwell noticed how she referred to her late husband by his first name, Edmund, not with the affection characteristic of a grieving widow but with the emotional distance of someone recognizing a distant acquaintance from the past. And did her studies bring her the comfort she sought? Isabella's gloved finger delicately traced the outline of the ancient vase without touching it directly. They brought me meaningful purpose, she replied thoughtfully. After all, purpose was precisely what I most desperately needed in that dark period. Lady Worthington, that would be Adelaide Worthington, whom I have read extensively. I believe her essays on Hellenistic culture were published by the Society of Antiquaries. Isabella's genuine surprise was evident in her expression. Yes, exactly. I had no idea you followed specialized academic publications, my lord. Maxwell, he automatically corrected again. And there are many facets of me you may not know, Isabella. 5 years create considerable gaps in our mutual knowledge. They walked in contemplative silence through the sculpture gallery, surrounded by white marble statues of ancient gods and heroes that watched them with blind but eternal eyes. Maxwell felt Isabella's visible tension gradually ease amidst the historical artifacts. You seem truly in your element here among these antiquities, he observed approvingly. Historical artifacts are considerably more reliable than contemporary people, Isabella said with refreshing honesty. They respond to careful study, proper preservation, and respect in entirely predictable ways. Human society is substantially less comprehensible. As we painfully witnessed last night at the ball, Maxwell agreed, gently guiding her to a wooden bench next to a remarkably preserved Egyptian sarcophagus. Lady Pemberton's calculatedly cruel comment. Isabella's shoulders visibly stiffened again. The malicious rumors had begun almost immediately after Edmund's sudden death. A seemingly healthy man who had passed away unexpectedly. The Hartley family had never approved of our marriage from the beginning. They considered me significantly inferior to him despite my respectable lineage, so when he left absolutely everything to me instead of to his younger brother through a revised will, she exhaled slowly, controlling her emotions. The venomous suspicion was completely unavoidable. Were there formal charges filed against you? Nothing that could be legally substantiated, she said, her voice firm but low. The family doctor officially declared heart failure the cause of death. Edmund had complained of persistent chest pains for months preceding, though very few people knew this information. He was excessively proud, deeply reluctant to acknowledge any physical weaknesses publicly. Maxwell studied her delicate profile, noting the evident tension in her jaw and the way her fingers intertwined nervously. Yet you hid completely for 5 whole years in the countryside. I didn't hide deliberately, Isabella corrected with gentle firmness. I strategically withdrew from a society that had already judged and condemned me without evidence. From the endless whispers, the accusatory sidelong glances. I was completely exhausted of being a perpetual target of malicious speculation. First as the naive debutante who married a man more than twice her age for money, then as the young widow suspected of murder. They reached a secluded bench strategically positioned near a high window overlooking the flourishing outdoor gardens. Lady Beaumont discreetly settled herself on another nearby bench, close enough to observe properties but not to overhear private conversations. Why return now in particular, Isabella? Maxwell asked, her voice thick with restrained emotion. She looked him squarely in the eye for the first time, with complete honesty. Because hiding has progressively begun to feel dangerously like guilt, Maxwell. I have absolutely nothing to hide from anyone. Nothing to be genuinely ashamed of. I never believed for a moment that you had, he said with absolute conviction. No, his smile was infinitely sad. Not even when I married Edmund instead of patiently waiting for you, against our plans and promises. The implicit question hung between them, laden with years of unspoken history and repressed emotions. I was intensely angry, Maxwell admitted with brutal honesty. Deeply hurt beyond words. But I understood perfectly that your father's desperate financial situation forced you to make this impossible decision. There was no real alternative for you. And you, Maxwell? Isabella's voice trembled slightly. After I got married, you never contacted me, never wrote a single letter. Your husband made it absolutely clear that my attention or presence was not welcome under any circumstances, Maxwell said, his jaw tightening with unpleasant memory. He personally visited me at Ashford House to ensure I fully understood that message. Isabella's eyes widened with genuine shock. Edmund came to you directly. He never told me a thing about it. No, I imagine he deliberately wouldn't have told you, Maxwell replied somberly. What exactly did he tell you on that visit? Maxwell's expression darkened visibly as he recalled that unpleasant encounter. He formally informed me that, as your lawful husband, he would not tolerate any continued contact between us under any circumstances. He clearly implied that any attempt to communicate with you would result in your definitive and permanent removal from London to remote family estates. He couldn't legally have done that, Isabella began to protest, then stopped abruptly. No, I recognize that was exactly the sort of thing Edmund would have done without hesitation. He threatened similar measures when I expressed modest interest in attending public academic lectures or visiting museums without constant supervision. A heavy silence fell between them, filled only with the distant echo of footsteps from other museum visitors and muffled voices from adjacent galleries. He wasn't kind to you at all, was he? Maxwell asked carefully, though she already knew the answer. Isabella gazed at a distant statue of Athena for a long moment before answering. Edmund was exactly what he appeared to be on the outside, a man completely accustomed to acquiring valuable possessions and displaying them for the admiration of others. I was simply another precious addition to his personal collection. The devastating implication in her carefully chosen words made Maxwell's jaw tighten violently. "Isabella, did he hurt you in specific ways?" "It doesn't really matter now," she interrupted quickly, looking away. "Edmund is gone forever. His actions are in the past." "It matters tremendously to me," Maxwell said with barely contained passionate fervor. Isabella turned to face him directly, her expression softening perceptibly. "Ever the noble knight, eternally ready to fight imaginary shadows and dragons in my name." "Not shadows or dragons, Isabella," he corrected fiercely. "Real threats, real pain that you endured." Maxwell fought the overwhelming urge to take her hand right there in public. "If he caused you deliberate suffering of any kind." "So what exactly?" Isabella challenged softly but firmly. "Would you challenge his lingering ghost now?" "The past cannot be undone or rewritten, Maxwell. I have already come to terms with this reality, or am gradually trying to come to terms with it." She gestured gracefully toward an adjacent gallery displaying Roman mosaics. "The mosaics in the eastern wing are supposedly magnificent. Shall we go that way?" Maxwell acknowledged her deliberate diversion from the painful subject but respectfully allowed the change. They walked through corridors lined with artifacts from extinct civilizations, each piece silently testifying to the inexorable passage of time and the resilience of the human spirit. "You've always shown a fascination with ancient history," he observed, recalling conversations from years past. "I still maintain that deep interest," she admitted, "though my perspective has evolved significantly. Before, I admired the grandeur of lost civilizations in the abstract. Now I appreciate more deeply the individual stories, the ordinary people who survived wars, loss, and personal tragedies, rebuilding lives from ruins." "As you did," Maxwell thought, but didn't voice it. "I created a small study space at Willowmere Manor," Isabella continued with palpable genuine enthusiasm. "Nothing as grand as museum collections, of course, but I have amassed substantial books, historical maps, and some reproductions of significant artifacts. I've spent countless hours studying the rise and fall of empires." "You speak of Willowmere with genuine and profound affection," Maxwell observed intently. "Will you be returning there soon?" The question hung between them with obvious and significant implications. Catherine hesitated visibly, considering carefully. "I had originally planned to remain in London for only 6 weeks, long enough to satisfy Aunt Constance's insistence that I return to the social world. But now," she looked directly at him before looking away, "now my plans seem considerably less defined and certain." A distant clock in some corridor of the museum struck 4 solemn chimes, and Isabella sighed with evident reluctance. "I should return soon. I promised Lady Worthington I would accompany her to a lecture this evening at the Geographical Society." Maxwell rose immediately, offering his arm. "May I visit you again soon?" Isabella hesitated briefly, then nodded decisively. "I am temporarily residing at Aunt Constance's house in Bedford Square. Perhaps next Tuesday afternoon." As they walked back toward the museum's main entrance, Maxwell noted Isabella's deliberately slow steps as they passed a final gallery displaying recently acquired Parthenon friezes. "You've always shown a particular appreciation for classical Greek art and architecture," he observed with precise memory. "I still hold that admiration," she admitted thoughtfully, "though my taste has evolved from preferring idealized perfection to appreciating beauty in imperfections, in the cracks and fragments that tell stories of survival through the centuries." "Like you," Maxwell thought again, but remained silent. At the museum entrance, where Isabella's carriage waited patiently, Maxwell bowed formally over her hand. "See you Tuesday, then, Isabella." As the carriage slowly pulled away, Maxwell remained with more questions than definitive answers, but also with growing, unwavering determination. Whatever demons persistently haunted Isabella's past, he would not allow them to steal his future, their future together, if he had any say in the matter. That evening, Maxwell was at his exclusive club in St. James's, where Sebastian joined him at their usual secluded table. "Your excursion to the museum with Lady Hartley is already widespread knowledge," Sebastian commented, signaling for the waiter to bring brandy. "Lady Pemberton is particularly eloquent about his supposed grave error of judgment." "Lady Pemberton should be productively occupied with her own abundant affairs," Maxwell replied dryly, without looking up. Sebastian leaned forward confidentially. "I made some discreet inquiries into Lord Hartley's death, as you did not request." Maxwell stiffened visibly. "I did not explicitly ask you to do this, Sebastian." "No," Sebastian agreed calmly, "but your evident interest in his widow made it prudent and necessary." He took an appreciative sip of brandy. "I spoke confidentially with Sir William Hartley, the physician who attended Hartley in the final months of his life. He definitively confirmed that Hartley suffered from progressive angina pectoris, severe enough that Hartley explicitly warned him to avoid excessive physical or emotional exertion." "So why the persistent suspicion directed specifically at Isabella?" "Because," Sebastian carefully and deliberately stated, "Hartley died after a rather heated argument with his wife, according to the testimony of his personal servant. Specifically, an argument over financial matters, Isabella's discovery that Hartley had never fulfilled his solemn promise to pay her father's debts." Maxwell clenched his hand around his glass with controlled force. "What exactly are you saying?" "Apparently," Sebastian explained methodically, "Lord Hartley only lent Sir William Fairchild enough funds to temporarily keep his most immediate creditors at bay. When Sir William died unexpectedly just 7 months after Isabella's wedding, Hartley aggressively called in the full loan, effectively claiming the entire remainder of the Fairchild estate. Isabella only discovered this devastating betrayal after her father's death, when she examined the estate documents. The pieces began to fall into place with devastating clarity in Maxwell's mind. So the fatal argument was about his father's fraudulent inheritance and Hartley's betrayal." "Precisely," Sebastian confirmed, finishing his brandy. "After this heated exchange, Hartley retired visibly agitated and never woke up again." Richard paused meaningfully. "The subsequent investigation was surprisingly brief and superficial. Lady Hartley had been seen having a civilized dinner with her husband and then retiring to her separate room hours before her death. The doctor found no evidence of foul play or poisoning. So why did the poisonous rumors persist so tenaciously? Because Hartley's younger brother, Viscount Redmond, would have been the natural heir in the absence of a will," Sebastian explained. "But Hartley had altered his will just months before his death, leaving absolutely everything to Isabella and completely excluding his brother from any inheritance." Sebastian shrugged expressively. "More than enough reason to arouse suspicion in the eyes of scandal-hungry society, though legally completely insufficient for any formal accusation." Maxwell leaned back in his chair, meticulously processing this revealing information. "She never told me anything about the betrayal involving her father's estate. Perhaps she thought it would further damage her in the eyes of society," Sebastian suggested thoughtfully. "Or perhaps she simply wishes to put the painful past to rest." "And what about Hartley's brother, Viscount Redmond? Is he still actively spreading these malicious rumors?" "Occasionally, and with considerable bitterness," Sebastian confirmed with a raised eyebrow. "Although most of society has grown weary of his repetitive and transparently self-serving complaints, he still regularly claims that Isabella somehow manipulated or unduly influenced Hartley to change his will, though he has enough foresight to never make direct accusations of murder that could result in legal action." "And Lady Pemberton specifically, why her particular animosity toward Isabella?" "Your niece, Miss Caroline Pemberton, was once rumored as a possible suitor for Hartley before Isabella completely captured his attention," Sebastian explained. "Years later, that same niece was briefly engaged to you, Maxwell, before you abruptly called it off." Sebastian gave her a piercing, meaningful look. "Some specific women hold grudges substantially longer than most historical wars." Later that evening, Maxwell paced in his office, the conversation with Sebastian echoing persistently in his mind. Isabella had married Edmund Hartley specifically to save her father from complete financial ruin, only to discover devastatingly that the extraordinary sacrifice had been completely in vain, a cruel manipulation. The blatant injustice of this burned intensely in Maxwell's chest. Tuesday couldn't come soon enough. Isabella's return to Bedford Square was greeted with a letter waiting elegantly on the polished silver tray in the entrance hall. The refined handwriting on the envelope was instantly recognizable. Lady Worthington's unmistakable handwriting, she murmured, breaking the red wax seal. Dear Isabella, I write with unexpectedly favorable news. I arrived in London earlier than originally planned and have taken comfortable accommodations at Claridge's. My lecture at the Geographical Society has been brought forward by 3 days, which leaves me free tomorrow evening. May I have the pleasure of inviting you to dinner? I am extremely anxious to hear how your reintroduction to society is progressing, and I bring news from Willowmere that will surely interest you. With sincere affection, Adelaide Worthington. Isabella smiled genuinely, feeling warm with genuine pleasure and anticipation. Adelaide Worthington had been her salvation during her years in the countryside, a widow of substantial independent means who had transformed her own grief into productive scholarly pursuits. By the age of 50, Lady Worthington had published 2 respected books on geology and mineralogy, maintained correspondence with scholars throughout Europe, and completely disregarded society's restrictive expectations of how a woman should occupy her time and mind. Morris, Isabella has summoned your trusted maid. Please send an immediate note to Lady Worthington at Claridge's. She will dine with us tomorrow without fail. Yes, my lady. And should I inform cook that there will be an additional guest for dinner? Please do so immediately and have Simmons prepare the green guest room. I will not let her stay in a hotel when we have more than enough room here. As Morris left to perform his duties, Lady Beaumont gracefully emerged from the music room. I gather from her radiant expression that the museum excursion with his lordship was satisfactorily enjoyable. Isabella carefully removed her gloves and hat. It was deeply enlightening in multiple ways. Enough to warrant a second meeting, I naturally assume. He is to visit us next Tuesday as we arranged. Isabella met her aunt's knowing and penetrating gaze. It is merely a continuation of our intellectual conversation. Naturally, Constance replied, her tone carefully neutral though her eyes glittered with knowledge. And will this prolonged conversation eventually address the undeniable fact that neither of you has forgotten the other for 5 full years? Isabella blushed visibly. Aunt Constance, really? My dear girl, I'm not criticizing you at all. Quite the opposite, in fact. When Edmund finally died, I genuinely feared that you would never allow yourself to experience genuine happiness again. The way he consistently treated you. Constance's expression darkened momentarily before clearing again. Well, the painful past is irrevocably past. But seeing you with Maxwell Ashford today vividly reminded me of the girl you were years ago. Vibrant, hopeful, full of dreams and possibilities. Maxwell and I have considerable history, Isabella warned carefully. Not all of it is pleasant or simple. Life rarely offers perfectly ideal circumstances, Isabella, Constance said wisely. Sometimes we need to courageously embrace happiness despite the inevitable complications. Constance patted her niece's hand affectionately. Now, tell me in detail about Lady Worthington's letter. As Isabella recounted the full story, she experienced a curious sense of previously separate worlds colliding unexpectedly. Her peaceful, studious existence in Willowmere intertwined with her complicated London past. Lady Worthington, who had known only the resilient woman Isabella had become during her years of self-imposed exile, would now witness her navigating the treacherous waters of London society. And on Tuesday, Maxwell would return again. These thoughts occupied Isabella deeply as she prepared for bed later, her diary open in front of her on her desk. June 18, 1845. Adelaide arrives tomorrow night, bringing a welcome connection to the life I've carefully built at Willowmere. I find myself wondering what she will make of pretentious London society and what that society will make of her, a woman who so openly defies convention. She has little patience for empty social pretenses, which can simultaneously charm or terrify conservative high society. Today with Maxwell was simultaneously comforting and emotionally torturous. Walking beside him again, sharing thoughts and observations as we naturally did before everything fell apart, was like recovering an essential piece of myself that I lost long ago and believed irretrievable. Yet the barriers between us remained substantial and intimidating. He questioned Edmund, though not directly or explicitly. How could I tell him the whole devastating truth? That my marriage was a prison of subtle and constant cruelties, calculated slights, that Edmund took obvious pleasure in reminding me daily of my supposedly fortunate escape from financial ruin, a debt I was expected to repay through perfect obedience and complete submission. And then to discover that Edmund had confronted Maxwell directly and threatened to expel me from London if he attempted any contact. The revelation shouldn't have surprised me after everything I knew of Edmund. But it still does, painfully. Even from the cold grave, Edmund's calculated manipulations continue to unravel like slow poison. Maxwell has asked to visit again next Tuesday. Conventional wisdom firmly tells me I must discourage his increasing attention, protect us both from the inevitable malicious gossip and poisonous speculation. Lady Pemberton has already begun her systematic campaign against me. Others will surely follow her predatory example. Yet when he looks at me with those emerald green eyes that have haunted my dreams for 5 endless years, wisdom seems a cold and insufficient companion. Isabella carefully closed her journal and extinguished the oil lamp. In the comforting darkness, she allowed herself to remember Maxwell as he had been today at the museum, caring, compassionate, his genuine concern for her evident in every lingering look and chosen word. Whatever inevitably came next, she could no longer convincingly feign indifference. The heart she had believed safely buried beneath academic pursuits and a quiet country life had reluctantly awakened. It remained to be seen whether she would courageously heed its call or retreat once again to the familiar safety of solitude. Lady Adelaide Worthington arrived promptly at 6 the following afternoon, entering the house with the energy characteristic of a woman half her chronological age. Her silver-streaked gray hair was neatly tucked under a modest but elegant hat, and her traveling attire, a practical dark brown, bore obvious signs of Claridge's journey. "Isabella, my dear," she embraced warmly, "what an extraordinary delight to see you in this sophisticated urban setting. You look remarkably well. The London air suits you more than I ever reasonably expected." "Adelaide," Catherine returned the hug with genuine affection. "I've missed you deeply. Come, you must meet my Aunt Constance immediately." Lady Beaumont and Lady Worthington sized each other up with the careful appraisal characteristic of two society matrons from different walks of life before apparently simultaneously deciding that mutual approval was not only justified but desirable. "Your niece has been a true gift in the country," Adelaide told Constance over delicately served tea. "Your meticulous cataloguing of local Roman ruins has contributed significantly to my research on ancient British buildings." Isabella mentioned her upcoming lecture at the Geographical Society. Constance replied diplomatically. "A considerable honor, I understand, though I anticipate several male members will develop sudden hearing impairments when a woman ascends the traditionally male podium." Adelaide's eyes sparkled with evident, malicious amusement. "Fortunately, my meticulous research speaks loudly enough to overcome such convenient selective afflictions." Isabella smiled genuinely, watching the two women she admired most in the world chatting animatedly. Adelaide had been her mentor in her academic pursuits, while Aunt Constance had guided her through the complex maze of society since her earliest childhood. They represented the two seemingly incompatible halves of her divided life, the scholar she had become and the aristocrat she was born to be. "I have brought substantial news from Willowmere," Adelaide said, turning to Isabella with evident enthusiasm. "The Reverend Dr. Clark has definitively confirmed your observations of Latin inscriptions in the ruins near the manor. He incorporated your detailed data into his latest scholarly paper and emphatically insists on crediting you as a key contributor." Isabella's eyes widened in genuine surprise. "Is that true? But I only provided basic observation notes." "Observations made with admirable methodical precision and substantial historical insight," Adelaide corrected firmly. "Clark values your contributions enormously, as I do." She hesitated perceptibly, looking at Lady Beaumont uncertainly. "In fact, I had hoped to discuss a possible meaningful collaboration during my visit, but perhaps that's a topic for a more appropriate time. Complete nonsense, Constance dismissed the concern with a decisive gesture. I may be a conventional society lady, but I'm not so old-fashioned as to disapprove of female intellectual pursuits. Isabella's father encouraged her to study extensively from childhood, a progressive attitude I've always deeply admired in my brother. Adelaide nodded, apparently completely satisfied. Very well then, Isabella. The Geographical Society is preparing a comprehensive study of Roman archaeological sites in Britain. Given your extensive work on the ruins of Sussex, Clark and I firmly believe you would be an ideal contributor to the southern section. Me? Isabella set down her delicate teacup with a slight clink. But I have no formal academic training. Nor did many of humanity's most important historians, Adelaide replied with conviction. Your methodology is sound, your observations precise and well documented. The contribution would be published under your own name. A significant achievement for any scholar, especially a woman in our restrictive age. The simultaneously exciting and unsettling opportunity hung in the air. Isabella, I would be deeply honored, of course, but I had planned to return to Willowmere in approximately 4 weeks. Are those plans still firmly in place? Constance asked, her tone carefully neutral but charged with meaning. Isabella immediately thought of Maxwell, of Tuesday's promised visit. I believe my schedule is somewhat unstable at the moment. Adelaide's shrewd eyes missed absolutely nothing. Isabella Hartley, unstable. This is genuinely unexpected. You have been an exemplary model of decisive and organized planning for as long as I have known you intimately. She smiled with evident complicity. I would genuinely like to know the cause of this sudden uncertainty. Before Isabella could formulate a suitable response, Morris appeared discreetly in the drawing-room doorway. Excuse me, my lady. His lordship, the Earl of Ravenswood, has arrived unexpectedly. I informed him that you were busy with guests, but he specifically asked me to deliver this personally. Morris presented a small package elegantly wrapped in silver paper and tied with a dark blue ribbon. Thank you, Morris. Isabella accepted the package, acutely aware of Adelaide's arched eyebrow and Aunt Constance's barely concealed smile. Shall I send a specific reply, my lady? Please inform his lordship that I sincerely thank him for his consideration and look forward to our meeting on Tuesday as arranged. When Morris silently withdrew, Adelaide leaned forward with evident curiosity. Earl of Ravenswood, Isabella. You have deliberately withheld substantial information from me. Is this the cause of your unstable schedule? Isabella carefully untied the silken ribbon. Inside the package was a small, dark green leather-bound volume on Roman architecture in Britain by Professor Edmund Thornbury. A note written in Maxwell's bold handwriting was carefully hidden inside the front cover. Isabella, our conversation at the museum reminded me of this particular volume. Thornbury's observations on resilient structures that have survived centuries of adversity inevitably reminded me of you. See you Tuesday with anticipation. Yours, Maxwell. Well, Adelaide suggested expectantly, don't keep us in unnecessary suspense, dear. Isabella passed the book to Adelaide, who examined it with obvious professional interest. Thornbury's work, an excellent choice and remarkably thoughtful. This is not a volume typically found in conventional aristocratic libraries. She looked at Isabella penetratingly. The Earl of Ravenswood is a man of unexpected intellectual depth, it seems. Maxwell and Isabella were quite close before her marriage to Lord Hartley, Constance added informatively, ignoring Isabella's warning look. Their recent reunion has been the talk of London this past week. Indeed, Adelaide's expression grew serious and thoughtful. Isabella, you never mentioned a prior romantic attachment when you first came to Willowmere. It was extremely painful to discuss at the time, Isabella admitted, retrieving the book, her fingers running gently over the leather spine. Maxwell and I had an informal but genuine understanding. When my father's catastrophic financial situation deteriorated irreversibly, Lord Hartley offered marriage and the payment of all debts. Duty and necessity demanded it. I accepted against my heart. Ah, Adelaide nodded slowly in understanding. And now, as a financially independent widow, you find yourself free to follow your heart instead of oppressive duty. It's not so absolutely simple, Isabella sighed. Society has an extraordinarily long memory, Adelaide. The circumstances of Edmund's death, the poisonous rumors that persistently followed. They create substantial complications for any potential relationship, especially with someone of Maxwell's exalted status. Complications? Adelaide scoffed with obvious disdain. In my considerable experience, society's disapproval is directly proportional to the genuine happiness one can achieve by completely ignoring it. She set down her teacup with decisive firmness. Isabella, when you arrived at Willowmere 5 years ago, you were a fragile shell of a person, a young woman who had completely forgotten how to smile genuinely. Whatever your husband did to you, and I suspect it was considerable and devastating, he does not deserve to control your future from the cold grave. Adelaide, Constance exclaimed, though her tone betrayed more surprise than genuine censure. Forgive my characteristic bluntness, Lady Beaumont, Adelaide said, but I have spent 5 years watching Isabella meticulously rebuild herself piece by piece. If this Earl represents a genuine chance for true happiness, I will not stand idly by while the chattering tongues of society deprive her of it. Isabella felt tears threaten treacherously. You don't fully understand the devastating power of scandal in these social circles, Adelaide. Maxwell's position is secure enough to withstand considerable gossip, Adelaide concluded with absolute firmness. An earl is rarely at the mercy of empty drawing-room whispers. Besides, if he's intelligent enough to simultaneously appreciate you and Thornbury's historical standing, he's intelligent enough to make his own decisions about acceptable social risks. When dinner was finally announced, Isabella found herself seriously considering Adelaide's characteristically straightforward perspective. The scientific mindset valued concrete evidence over unfounded rumor, verifiable facts over malicious speculation. At Sussex, among scholars and academics, Isabella had been judged by her intellectual contributions and demonstrated character, not by the arbitrary standards of prejudiced society. Would she have the courage to apply that same rational standard to her future personal happiness? Dinner passed pleasantly, with Adelaide recounting her latest discoveries and Constance sharing the latest news from London society. Isabella was grateful to have these two extraordinary women in her life, each representing different aspects of who she was and who she wanted to become. As Adelaide retired to the guest room and Constance retired to her quarters, Isabella remained in the drawing room for a few more moments, contemplating the events of the past few days. Her life, which had been so carefully ordered and predictable at Willowmere, was now in complete transformation. The return to London, the reunion with Maxwell, the possibility of a meaningful academic collaboration, all seemed to be converging simultaneously. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Isabella finally went upstairs to her room, where Morris was waiting for her. You seem thoughtful tonight, my lady, Morris observed as he helped Isabella get ready for bed. I'm reflecting on choices, Morris, Isabella replied. On paths that fork and decisions that shape destinies. Life has a peculiar way of presenting us with second chances when we least expect it. True, my lady. And when such opportunities arise, it is wise to seize them with both hands. Isabella smiled slightly. You have always been wiser than you let on, Morris. When Morris had left, Isabella once again opened her diary. June 18, 1845, she wrote. Adelaide is here, bringing with her the world of Willowmere that I thought I had temporarily left behind. Her presence reminds me of who I became during those years of self-imposed exile, a woman of intellectual substance, of definite purpose. Yet Maxwell reminds me of who I was before everything fell apart, a young woman full of hopes and dreams. Is it possible to be both simultaneously? Can I be the serious scholar and the passionate woman? The respectable countess and the academic collaborator? Adelaide's words echo persistently. If Maxwell is intelligent enough to appreciate both my mind and my heart, then perhaps he is exactly the man I need by my side. Not someone who restricts me like Edmund did, but someone who encourages me to soar even higher. Tuesday approaches. Another conversation, another opportunity to evaluate whether what I feel is real or simply the nostalgia of a lost youthful love. But when I see him, when his eyes meet mine, I don't feel nostalgia. I feel as if I'm finally returning home after a long journey in foreign lands. Isabella closed the diary and blew out the candle, allowing darkness to envelop her. Her last thoughts before sleep were of Maxwell, of his hands holding hers, of his voice whispering that he had waited for her. And for the first time in 5 years, Isabella allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, the future could be bright again. The following days passed in preparation for Tuesday. Adelaide devoted her mornings to reviewing her notes for the lecture at the Geographical Society, while Isabella assisted when possible, grateful for the distraction that intellectual work provided. The afternoons were filled with strategic social visits, Constance insisting that Isabella needed to be seen in society, gradually but firmly establishing her presence. Lady Worthington caused a sensation at a literary tea party when she publicly declared that Isabella possessed one of the sharpest minds she had ever encountered, regardless of gender. This comment, coming from a respected academic, did more to elevate Isabella's status than dozens of ball appearances ever could. On Monday evening, the eve of Maxwell's promised visit, Isabella was inexplicably nervous. Adelaide, sensing her agitation, sat beside her in the drawing room after dinner. "You are apprehensive about tomorrow," she observed with characteristic frankness. "It's not exactly apprehension," Isabella searched for the right words. "It's more like standing on the edge of a cliff, knowing the next step will be decisive one way or another." "Are you afraid of falling or flying?" Adelaide asked perceptively. Isabella considered the question. "Both, I suppose. Falling would be devastating after having so carefully rebuilt myself. But flying would be admitting that I still yearn for things I thought I buried with my failed marriage." Adelaide took Isabella's hand. "My dear, you don't have to choose between the scholar and the passionate woman. You can be both. In fact, one enriches the other. My own academic work became deeper after my husband's death, not despite the loss but because of it. Grief taught me about resilience, about the human capacity to harden and yet remain beautiful, like these ancient rocks I study. You are like these rocks, Isabella. Tempered by pressure and time, stronger and more valuable because of it." Adelaide's words brought unexpected comfort. "Thank you, Adelaide. For everything. For giving me purpose when I needed it most, for coming to London to support me, for reminding me that I am more than the label society tries to impose on me." Adelaide smiled fondly. "You've always been extraordinary, Isabella. You've just temporarily forgotten it. Tomorrow, when this Earl of yours comes to visit, remember that he should be honored by your attention, not the other way around." Tuesday dawned bright and sunny, a rare London summer day without the characteristic fog. Isabella chose her dress carefully, not too formal but elegant enough to show respect for the occasion. Morris arranged her hair in a simple but flattering style, and when Isabella looked in the mirror, she saw not the haunted widow who had arrived in London weeks ago, but a woman prepared to embrace her future, whatever its shape. "Morris, Isabella asked you to please send an immediate note to Lady Worthington at Claridge's. She will dine with us tomorrow without fail." "Yes, my lady." "And should I inform cook that there will be an additional guest for dinner?" "Please do so immediately and have Simmons prepare the green guest room. I will not let her stay in a hotel when we have more than enough room here." As Morris left to perform his duties, Lady Beaumont gracefully emerged from the music room. I gather from her radiant expression that the museum excursion with his lordship was satisfactorily enjoyable. Isabella carefully removed her gloves and hat. It was deeply enlightening in multiple ways. Enough to warrant a second meeting, I naturally assume. He is to visit us next Tuesday as we arranged. Isabella met her aunt's knowing and penetrating gaze. It is merely a continuation of our intellectual conversation. Of course, Constance replied, her tone carefully neutral though her eyes gleamed with knowledge. And will this prolonged conversation eventually address the undeniable fact that neither of you has forgotten the other for 5 full years? Isabella blushed visibly. Aunt Constance, really? My dear girl, I'm not criticizing you at all. Quite the opposite, in fact. When Edmund finally died, I genuinely feared you would never allow yourself to experience true happiness again. The way he consistently treated you. Constance's expression darkened momentarily before clearing again. Well, the painful past is irrevocably past. But seeing you with Maxwell Ashford today vividly reminded me of the girl you were years ago. Vibrant, hopeful, full of dreams and possibilities. Maxwell and I have considerable history between us, Isabella warned carefully. Not all of it is pleasant or simple. Life rarely offers perfectly ideal circumstances, Isabella, Constance said wisely. Sometimes we must courageously embrace happiness despite the inevitable complications. Constance patted her niece's hand affectionately. Now, tell me in detail about Lady Worthington's letter. Lady Adelaide Worthington arrived promptly at 6 the following afternoon, entering the house with the energy characteristic of a woman half her chronological age. Her silver-streaked gray hair was neatly tucked under a modest but elegant hat, and her traveling attire, a practical dark brown, bore obvious signs of her journey. Isabella, my dear, she embraced warmly, what an extraordinary delight to see you in this sophisticated urban setting. You look remarkably well. The London air suits you more than I ever reasonably expected. Adelaide, Isabella returned the hug with genuine affection. I've missed you deeply. Come, you must meet my Aunt Constance immediately. Lady Beaumont and Lady Worthington sized each other up with the careful appraisal characteristic of two society matrons before apparently deciding that mutual approval was warranted. Your niece has been a true gift in the country, Adelaide told Constance over tea. Her meticulous cataloguing of local Roman ruins has contributed significantly to my research on ancient British buildings. Isabella mentioned her upcoming lecture at the Geographical Society, Constance replied diplomatically. A considerable honor, I understand, though I anticipate several male members will develop hearing impairments when a woman takes the podium. Adelaide's eyes sparkled with amusement. Fortunately, my research speaks loudly enough to overcome such selective afflictions. I brought news from Willowmere, Adelaide said. The Reverend Dr. Clark confirmed your observations of inscriptions in the ruins. He insists on crediting her as a collaborator. Isabella's eyes widened. Is that true? But I only provided basic notes. Observations made with admirable precision, Adelaide corrected. Actually, the Geographical Society is preparing a study of Roman sites. Given your work, you would be an ideal collaborator. The contribution would be published under your name. Me? But I have no formal academic training. Nor did many important historians, Adelaide replied. Your methodology is sound. Before Isabella could respond, Morris appeared. Excuse me, my lady. The Earl of Ravenswood has arrived. He asked to deliver this. Morris presented a package wrapped in silver paper. Isabella opened it carefully. Inside was a book on Roman architecture, with a note from Maxwell. Isabella, our conversation reminded me of this volume. The observations on resilient structures reminded me of you. Until Tuesday. Yours, Maxwell. Well, said Adelaide, the Earl is a man of unexpected depth. Maxwell and Isabella were close before her marriage, Constance added. Their reunion has been the talk of London. Adelaide nodded. Isabella, you never mentioned a previous attachment. It was painful to discuss, Isabella admitted. Maxwell and I had an understanding. When my father's situation deteriorated, Lord Hartley offered marriage and payment of debts. I accepted. And now you are free to follow your heart, Adelaide said. It's not that simple. Society has a long memory. The circumstances of Edmund's death create complications. Complications? Adelaide scoffed. Society's disapproval is proportional to the happiness achieved by ignoring it. When you arrived at Willowmere, you were a shadow. Edmund doesn't deserve to control your future. Forgive my frankness, Lady Beaumont, but I spent 5 years watching Isabella rebuild herself. If this Earl represents happiness, I won't stand idly by. On Tuesday afternoon, Maxwell was in the drawing room of Lady Beaumont's house. Isabella entered wearing a lavender dress, looking more at ease. Your lordship, she greeted him. Maxwell, he corrected. Lady Beaumont excused herself to attend to correspondence, effectively leaving them alone. Thank you for the book, Isabella said. I noticed your genuine interest, Maxwell replied. Society assumes that female intellectual pursuits are affectations. Isabella smiled. I confess, embroidery and watercolors escaped me. Maxwell said his father had once shown him his painting of Ashford House. Isabella laughed. A diplomatic description of what looked like a shapeless cloud. Sebastian made inquiries about Lord Hartley, Maxwell said gently. He told me about his father's estate, how Hartley deceived her. Isabella's cup rattled. Lord Worthington should be more discreet. Why didn't you tell me? Maxwell asked. Because it doesn't change anything, she replied. It's in the past. It explains the argument before his death, Maxwell insisted. Context matters little when society has already decided, Isabella said, standing abruptly. I didn't poison my husband, Maxwell. His heart failed after our argument. I never believed you were capable of that, Maxwell said, joining her. But I believe you punished yourself unnecessarily for 5 years. Didn't you wonder why I never contacted you after Edmund died, she asked. Every day, Maxwell admitted. I was ashamed, she whispered, tears threatening. I chose Edmund to save my father, only to find out it was in vain. My father died believing he had secured his legacy. And when Edmund died after our argument, I wondered if I caused his cardiac arrest. You're not responsible for his death, Maxwell said. His lie, his heart condition. None of it was your fault. I took refuge in Willowmere to find myself again, said Isabella. And you found yourself? Asked Maxwell. I believe so. Maxwell, why did you remain single? I was briefly engaged 3 years ago, Maxwell explained. To Lady Caroline Pemberton. I called it off a month before. I realized I was marrying out of duty, not love. Society must have been scandalized. Indeed. Perhaps that explains Lady Pemberton's animosity. What a pair we make. We could be a couple, Maxwell said, kneeling. 5 years ago, duty separated us. Haven't we sacrificed enough? Isabella's hands trembled. Society would never accept us. Scandal would follow us. So be it, Maxwell said vehemently. I spent years keeping up appearances. For what? Isabella, when I saw you, it was as if time began again. I've loved you since we were young. I loved you when duty forced you to marry another. I still love you. And I've loved you always, Isabella touched her face. Despite everything, I never stopped. They kissed, a kiss that spoke of years of waiting finally fulfilled. If we do this, we'll face the consequences together, Isabella said. All of them. Partners, then, Maxwell agreed. In everything. Lady Beaumont appeared at the door. I see my correspondence took its time. Are congratulations deserved? Yes, Aunt, Isabella smiled radiantly. Then perhaps it's time for his lordship to meet his other champion, Constance said. Lady Worthington has appeared. Your aunt thought I would be needed, Adelaide explained. Although I see my experience is unnecessary. Maxwell bowed. Lady Worthington, I admired your work. Do you truly admire it? Adelaide assessed him. How refreshing. Isabella, I completely approve. The following weeks passed in cautious appearances. Maxwell and Isabella were seen together at exhibitions and meetings. Lady Pemberton and her circle kept their distance, but others began to welcome Isabella. Lord Sebastian became an ardent defender, using his influence to combat gossip. Lady Worthington added her respected voice. Scientific minds evaluate evidence, not rumor, she declared in a drawing room, silencing Lady Pemberton. Viscount Redmond, Edmund's brother, proved more difficult. At White's club, he confronted Maxwell. "So, you intend to marry my brother's widow? Does it bother you to know how she managed her convenient death?" The club fell silent. "What bothers me, Viscount, is how easily some reveal a lack of character through unfounded accusations," Maxwell said coldly. "Unfounded?" Redmond scoffed. "A healthy man dead after an argument with his wife who inherits everything." "Indeed, they do," Sebastian interrupted, "especially considering the medical report detailing Hartley's chronic heart condition. Sir William Hartley has agreed to testify about Lord Hartley's health. Would you like to test your insinuations in court?" The threat effectively silenced Redmond. 2 months later, St. Peter's Church was filled with wildflowers. Isabella stood before the altar in ivory silk, her hair crowned with orange blossoms, exchanging vows they had waited 5 years for. "I, Isabella, take you, Maxwell," her voice echoed clearly. When they were pronounced man and wife, Maxwell whispered, "I have waited for you." "And I for you, always," Isabella replied. In the carriage, Isabella asked, "Have you ever wondered what would have happened if we had defied convention 5 years ago?" "We would have had 5 more years together," Maxwell considered, "but perhaps not the wisdom our years apart taught us. The journey matters less than the destination. And we've arrived where we belong. Lady Worthington invited us to Sussex for the summer to continue my research." "A working honeymoon?" Maxwell smiled. "I can't think of anything more fitting." "You wouldn't mind?" "Many would expect something more conventional." "Isabella, if I wanted convention, I would have married one of the young women on my mother's list. I fell in love with you. Your mind, your spirit, your determination. I believe I made an excellent match," Isabella said. "Just like me," Maxwell kissed her back. "Together," she said. "Whatever comes." "Together always," Maxwell agreed. A year later, the Ashford House drawing room bustled with distinguished guests amidst displays of historical artifacts. Isabella, elegant in emerald green silk, explained her system for cataloguing Roman ruins. "You presented it remarkably easily," Professor Clark observed. "That was my intention," Isabella replied. "Knowledge progresses when shared." Maxwell watched his wife with pride. In the year since their wedding, Isabella had transformed completely. The Geographical Society had published her study to acclaim. Lady Margaret, Maxwell's mother, approached. "I must admit, son, that your countess has brought unexpected distinction to the Ashford name. Her greatest success," Maxwell said, "is making Ashford House a home and making me happier than I ever imagined possible." Later, Isabella found Maxwell in his office. "I have a letter from Professor Clark. The Society wishes to publish our expanded study, with our names as lead authors." "Extraordinary," Maxwell said proudly. "There was a time when I believed my life's purpose would be fulfilled only through marriage," Isabella said. "I never imagined I could have both meaningful work and a marriage of equals." "You redefined what a countess can be," Maxwell said. "And you gave me permission to redefine what an earl should be." Maxwell surprised society by taking an active interest in his estates, implementing agricultural innovations inspired by Isabella's approach. "Lady Pemberton really praised my approach today," Isabella said amusedly. "I almost fainted." "Scientific progress through social ambition," Maxwell laughed. "Do you regret anything?" Maxwell asked. "The scandal, the whispers." "No," Isabella said. "The whispers have faded. And what remains, this life we've built, is worth every moment." "Even Redmond's accusations?" "Even those," Isabella assured him. "His allegations crumbled, and he only damaged his own reputation. Besides, I had you by my side. That made all the difference." Always, Isabella. Always. A knock interrupted. Harrison entered. Lady Worthington arrived unexpectedly. She insists she cannot wait. Lady Worthington entered, eyes shining. Forgive the hour, but extraordinary news. Isabella, a letter from Professor Linnaeus of Uppsala. He replicated our methods and confirmed our findings. He proposes a joint expedition this summer to compare Roman structures in Sussex with those in Sweden. An international collaboration, Isabella said admiringly. With 2 women as co-leaders, Adelaide corrected triumphantly. Linnaeus specifically requests that we both lead. It's unprecedented. Of course you have to go, Maxwell said. But that would mean months away. And Ashford will continue under my supervision, Maxwell concluded. This is the opportunity of a lifetime. I won't be the husband who clips his wife's wings. I don't deserve you. On the contrary, Maxwell replied. We deserve exactly this happiness. I knew he was the right man when I saw you appreciate the Thornbury rankings, Adelaide said to Maxwell. Later, as they prepared for bed, Isabella stood at the window. I was thinking about what you said in the carriage after our wedding. About our path and destiny. I believe we were both right, she said. Destiny matters, this life we created, but the path was also necessary. Everything, the separation, my marriage to Edmund, the years at Willowmere, even the scandal. Every step led us here, to a deeper happiness. Philosophers have debated for centuries whether suffering increases joy, Maxwell said. And what do you conclude? Isabella asked. That I would endure it all again, every moment of loneliness, every year of separation, if it meant ending up here with you in my arms. But I will not waste a single day of the time we are given. I will hold you to that promise, Isabella whispered, kissing him. Outside, London continued its eternal rhythms. But within Maxwell's embrace, Isabella found the peace that had eluded her for so long. They had survived duty and sacrifice, scandal and separation. What remained was a love tempered by time and strengthened by waiting, a love that remembered the way home and would never be forgotten. End. Dear listener, life doesn't always unfold as we initially dreamed. Sometimes we're forced to walk paths that break our hearts deeply, forced to endure losses we thought we couldn't survive. But, as Isabella and Maxwell have magnificently shown us, even after years of silence, sadness, and separation, true love inexorably finds its way back. This is what happens in our own lives. Time may take away loved ones, carefully crafted plans, and even youth, but it never takes away the fundamental essence of who we are. Every wrinkle tells a unique story. Every scar holds a valuable lesson. And with each new morning, we are still given the precious chance to begin again. To forgive, to love, to be loved, or simply to find peace within ourselves. If your heart feels heavy tonight, remember this clearly. Just as Isabella endured the whispers and Maxwell defied the world for love, you too carry a silent strength that no one fully sees. A strength that has brought you this far and will take you even further. Close your eyes tonight, knowing that everything you've experienced has made you wiser, kinder, and braver. And where there is true love, truth, or even a gentle yearning, there is also divine protection, light, and a deep sense of purpose. You are not alone. You never were. With all our sincere gratitude, the Legends of Autumn. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this unforgettable journey. If this story touched your heart, we invite you to like the video, leave a thoughtful comment, share it with others who love impactful love stories, and subscribe to our channel. Your support truly means a lot to us. From the bottom of our hearts, we thank you for helping us stay inspired and continue creating more stories filled with love, redemption, and breathtaking twists. At the end of this video, you'll see a suggestion for another story on our channel. Click and be amazed by more moving stories like this one. Let yourself be carried away once again by our sincere gratitude. Echoes of Romance.